started. This is the December 11th study session of the Littleton City Council. We have the full council in attendance. Our first item is the Employee Development Plan in 2019 Budget Proviso. And it's my understanding that Nicole, or Noel, you can, sorry, starts with an N.
What's her name?
That's okay.
You can call her.
There you go. There is help along with the singing. To let us know what you're needing from us this evening, and then we'll help make sure that you get that.
Perfect.
All right.
I think Mark wanted to.
Mark.
Actually, that's a pretty good introduction here, but it's pretty good.
Except forget the name. Would have been better.
Yeah, since we had the budget discussion here in September, and council was asking some questions, rightfully so here, just kind of about the scope. So that's certainly our opportunity here this evening. Plus, we had the Tipton group come in here a month ago, kind of touch on the same issues. So they're all kind of related here. And since Noel got an applause from council during the budget discussion, I decided that Noel's going to present on all topics. Public Works, Fire, Police. So with that, I think, I think this is, council knows this is pretty important to me personally, and I think this is our opportunity this evening to kind of talk about what we can expect from this effort here. So with that, Noel.
Perfect. Well, this is exciting. This is obviously HR's kind of bread and butter, so I'm going to try and keep the HR geek to myself a little bit. I'm really excited about this, and I'm really excited to present to you more information. I think that the idea behind the proviso is that you just want to see some more details about what it really meant and some of the components when we talk about organizational development or culture change. So this is a little bit different, Mark, than you and I talked about on this first slide, but the real point of this is to create a culture within our organization, and culture change has to go along with that. The Tipton group talked about strategy, and you can have strategy all day long, but if you don't account for the culture, your strategy kind of goes by the wayside, right? If we don't help people understand a bigger picture. So that's really at the heart of this, is helping our culture within our organization through these different areas of a vision that we need to develop. And so the vision is always right, the far reaching, kind of a little bit out of our grasp. It's where we're trying to go. And then the mission is what we do, the services we provide, identifying who we do them for, and then the purpose piece, which is always important for people to understand why we're doing it, not just who we're doing it for and what we're providing the services to, but the whole reason behind it. And then the values help us to make decisions along the way. Is it values of integrity, transparency, being data-driven, customer service, and those become our decision points. When all things are being equal, what's most transparent, what offers the most integrity, what serves our customer the best. And these are really important because our staff needs to understand when I'm expected to be on my own or I'm working frontline customer service, what serves my values as an organization the best. And those are helping to reach our mission and eventually our vision overall. So our thought is that our next step would be to develop an RFP and put it out. There's a lot of folks who could help us with this. And I wanted to talk about just a few of the components that would be included in the RFP. Everything from executive chartering, and that's where we get all the directors together and we talk through this. We have some debate on what we think should happen, what our values should be. The gap analysis with employees, some of that's going to say, man, the directors feel like this is the path. We need to see how that resonates with our employees and also see where the gap is. If we're not on the path of a value, why are we not there? What are the reasons for that? We have to be able to look at things logically, be able to make a plan, engaging the employees in various different ways. One of the next steps is creating a steering committee or an advisory committee. of employees, and when I say that, I mean truly across the board. Every pay grade needs to be represented, not just high earners. All different types of admin staff, professionals, labor trades, right, across the board that can help us guide where we can test things. They can offer suggestions and input. They would be highly valued in how we access them and then the feedback that they provide. There'll be cheerleaders or liaisons of this process, helping to explain, as it's tough for us to always get out to all the locations, but we need that. We need people to help us share that message and to cheer us on. Then comes the all-city training piece, and so we need to get all employees across the board. Sometimes councils choose to engage in that training, sometimes not, where we start creating a common language, set expectations of what our values are, how that translates to the real world workplace. It's a great place to start breaking down silos, having the training be cross-departmental and not just say all the engineers together, all the HR staff together, but to have people across the board in these trainings. Revising our new hire or onboarding orientations that we do. We've currently made an upgrade a little bit for orientation. We do things like give a tour of the city now, which we've never done before, at least that I know of. And we really spend time with them providing training, but we're missing this piece of welcome to Littleton and here's your purpose. This is what you're engaging in. This is how you helping to fill a pothole rolls all the way up into this vision that we have for the city. So the work that you may view as mundane actually is doing this impact in a community. And how do we help people connect all of those dots? And then of course there's the end piece of measuring. How do we measure through performance measures, potentially balanced scorecard, priority-based budgeting, that we're being successful and we're moving the needle? And then when we are or we're not, how do we calibrate that and make changes to be able to move forward? That was just a lot of talking. Is there any questions? I don't know if that's the protocol to stop and ask questions.
I do have a question. In terms of, I guess, most of this, how or is there a place that council can support besides budgets? And also, and we talked about this a little bit at budget, that every 2 years there's typically at least 1 or 2 seats that turn.
Right.
So that has a tendency to shift staff.
Right.
So, how is that cared for in here? And then again, how can council help support this? And do we have a role at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to address any of that, I certainly can.
A couple of thoughts, and then Noelle, you can kind of backstop me here. I think in the gap analysis, I think this is where the council, we will share with you kind of what we see within the organization. So that's kind of an assessment of where we believe we are currently and where we need to go. So I'm trying to figure out the strategy. So I think council needs to understand that and kind of the level of effort that's going to take to kind of bridge that gap. I think too, kind of the measurement and calibrate is the other opportunity for us to come back to council. One of the things that I want to make sure that we do, 2 things, I guess. I want to make sure that the citizen satisfaction and business surveys are tied into this process. So as we believe we're trying to reach, say, customer service, there's a way for us to kind of measure our success over time. So that's one way. The other is the Envision Littleton process. I want to make sure that council, assuming you approve that, we're going to find a way to integrate that into the values of this organization. And operationally, I've talked before about how those 5 kind of values or filters that we're going to use for the visioning process is integrated in everything that we do, including simple things like staff communications to the planning commissioner, boards and commissions, the council. So this is another way for the process to kind of help identify what are those measures, and when we report back to council on our progress, so you get to see that over time.
Kyle?
I'll ask Noelle, but because you're in the hot seat, feel free to defer it up the ladder. How would you define the current culture of the organization?
Oh man, that is the hot seat question.
I think it's time to move on.
That I'm only allowed 30 minutes. I think that
better than 2017 is the answer.
I'm sorry.
Better than 2017.
I think in general, I feel a vacuum from staff and employees of they want something more, but they don't quite know what it is and they don't know how to articulate it. I can use just my work group as an example. When I came in, day one of deliberate change, we're a service group. HR provides a service. We are not the yes-no gateway that you have to beat us down to get to a yes. We're going to try and say yes whenever we can, whenever it's appropriate and within policy and within the law. And that was like, whoa, from my own HR staff. And they didn't quite understand that. And they also didn't understand the workload that kind of came along with saying yes. Customer service is a little bit more work. But as we've gone through and we're sitting in meetings, and we sat in one just with Tim from the library the other day, he's like, I love HR now. And that never was said before. And so they're seeing the value of having a different purpose.
That is Tim, though, remember.
Yeah. So they see this value in having this positive outcomes. And then they're also seeing employees stay when before they would have gone because of the work. So I think that there is this need for it. And when we talk about onboarding, it's tricky because we do this training and we can't ground it in anything. We're like, be a great employee, do the best you can. We don't talk about we want integrity or customer service, and this is what that looks like. So I think for me, it's just avoid, not that people are doing things wrong or maliciously. They're also maybe not doing the best that they can because there's the vacuum there. I don't know, Mark, if you would describe it any differently.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that my experience is that employees want to know what's expected of them. And I think we're in a kind of a status where that's hard to describe, as Noel has done that. So therefore, if we can't articulate that clearly, it's hard to hold people accountable to that. And again, kind of reverse of that is accountability is okay as long as we set the expectation. And I think that's really what we're trying to do through the employees is kind of help establish that and then tie back into some of these other measures here. Yeah, I think the other thing we've commented before, and Bob Tipton did this as well, you have culture whether you acknowledge it or not. And so there's always the default. And so you have to recognize that. And so the question is, do you want to shape that culture? So if you lay out whatever strategy you want, it's almost pointless if you don't deal with the culture at the same time to reinforce that. So that's what we're trying to do here, is to kind of reinforce kind of our direction here through the organizational culture.
I know when I was on planning commission that we had planner ones that would present to us that had over 20 years of experience. And over the last 15 years, a lot of these folks that have been here for 20-something years are gone. I mean, you look around the room. I mean, it's a lot of new staff. Jocelyn is probably one of the longer ones, and she hasn't been here all that long. This is a perfect time to do that. But your question never did get answered. What about turnover?
Yeah.
About
Turnover
with the employees. Yeah, I think that this
Well,
is
council, as council changes, because council can have, we've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in a good way, and we've seen it happen in a negative way when there's turmoil or there's things going on council and how that affects staff. And so, you don't know. I work with other cities all over the state, and what is high functioning, high operating organization before an election can be inside out, upside down, and the next day. The consistency is that while there's a change at one level, there's not change at the other level. So you can't prevent the angst of it, but will this help to kind of steady that ship a bit?
I believe that it will. I think that because the highest level of leadership can turn over and change, that you need things like this so employees always have direction, right? Values. I can't imagine, I never say never, right? But a council member being elected and saying, we don't care about our citizens, right? We don't want, customer service. So we try and build these values as anchors for employees to go through. So when the times get hard, they can look back and say, man, what serves my organization? I have these values and what keeps me true to them, despite changes that are happening, right? And it's staff's responsibility to be flexible within those. So as maybe the vision changes and a new council rolls in and they say, we really want to add this, it's a really important priority to us. Our job to become flexible to that and to serve that vision.
Do you see council, I know you kind of threw it out to us, like council can or cannot be a part of this, but what would you recommend? So council and even some of our boards, how do we also maybe get some of this training? Because we're serving our citizens as well. So some thoughts on that. And then the second question is, I believe you guys did this in Aurora, correct? And so if you could share maybe some learnings from that you're kind of bringing into this to say, okay, I think we'll do it a little bit different here and here's why.
Absolutely. So I would absolutely, if someone asked my opinion, ask that council be involved in the training and the education, because part of what we'll do is create common language. And so as staff starts to present and talk about those things, if you're not in that, it'll be really hard for you to follow along the common language or meaningful phrases or things that we kind of come to as a new culture that kind of set our direction. So I think that that's really important, and really to understand the expectations of staff, because you help hold us accountable on all of those things as well. At Aurora, it was a long process. It took us about 7 years before we really felt like we changed the culture and this is really the way of life at Aurora. And I think some of the things that we, is a much larger organization, but it takes time. I would say over this course of 7 years, we had about 20% attrition as a result of this type of change, right? Folks who just didn't want to be on board, or who we managed out, who couldn't get kind of with the program. So it didn't happen all at once, but kind of over the course of the 7 years. And so I think that I knew that would happen, but was still surprised at how we had to manage that and how we have to equip our supervisors. Because if we're treating everyone with respect, if that was a core value, then employees who are in trouble and underperforming should be treated that way too. And so that's a different skill set than just this command and control of you will do this and if you don't, right? I mean, so we're setting a culture and a tone, and we have to treat our employees the way that we want them to treat our customers. And so the workload with that obviously goes up, the training goes up with that. But the real lesson for me was our supervisors and how critical they are. I ended up calling them like the meat in the sandwich, because they have the pressure from the directors and leadership for culture change. Then they have the operational burden that creates, and then employees who are all for it and they run 20 steps ahead, and you're like, whoa, hold on, let's stick as a group as we're moving through this. And then some employees who refuse to move and they're 20 steps behind. So more care and training and help for our supervisors, who are really the folks who are implementing and rolling this out.
So I think you touch on something there that I experienced as well when we went through a similar experience in my day job. And it's so important that we stay the course, because things will get really bad before they get good, and we have to stick to it. And I think that's something that we'll have to figure out how to manage through that as council changes, because there will be a point where you say, are we doing the right thing? We're going to question it. So it'd be good to maybe get some support or advice or tools from whoever's helping us with this, to help us identify that and then how to work through it.
Absolutely.
Carol?
I am so pleased, both Mark and Noelle, that we are doing this. I think it's been kind of something we've been trying to get to, maybe without naming it, for some time. And so it's just so refreshing to see it mapped out. Thank you.
So these areas here are some of the milestones that I believe we should call out specifically in the RFP. How will a vendor help us with the chartering, the gap analysis? But then we also have these other things that will be deliverables as a result of these milestones. The performance evaluations, you've heard me talk about that before. Our average employee is receiving 4.85 out of a 5, and that's the average employee. So we really are kind of, everyone's at the same level. Although managing employee relations, I know that's not true. The discipline and the investigations, I know that not every employee is there. So we will want a performance measure that really highlights our values and how we are measuring employees against that. And it's a good chance for us to recalibrate that whole system. So we'll be taking a look at that. Performance measures, taking a look at that, and how do we be accountable to them? How do we publish them? How do we share them? The connection and integration of the priority-based budgeting. train the trainer program, right? They'll come up with a curriculum to train all employees, but the goal would be then for the HR office to be able to take that on afterwards. We can't keep someone on for forever to train all of our new employees or to make calibration. You know, all of these things kind of as we go through education to our citizens as things start to change, right? As, you know, you can imagine if one of our values became innovation, just for an example, things are going to start changing, and how do we communicate that? You know, I applied for a job one way and maybe it's different now, and how do we help them? This change is hard on people, right? I mean, even if it's for a better outcome. So going through all of these items here. And Mark, I think there are a couple other, you talked about the...
Yeah, this presentation doesn't quite match what's in the packet. There's a couple other things we added on there, but I think the integration here with our kind of customer citizen satisfaction, citizen satisfaction and business surveys, and also our employee satisfaction survey. And I kind of mentioned this here during the budget process, but having been in an organization where the council looked at both the employee satisfaction and the customer or citizen satisfaction survey, and to kind of see over time how that changes, I'm telling you, that itself is a pretty strong anchor for an organization to keep pursuing it. And when you kind of achieve a result there that's pretty impressive, I'm telling you, it's really rewarding.
And so the money that we asked for in the budget, I think that there's some other uses that we'll use for that the piece with the consultant to help us through this process is one, and then there's other deliverables, right, like a branding effort. So when we say these is our vision, our values, we will want to brand that, put it on screensavers, on our badges. Right now it's about keeping it in front of people for the long term, maybe add it to our letterhead, a logo, right? So there's this graphic design that we'd want to do in partnership with communications, how we update on social media and start a new language, key terms that we'll want to use so people become comfortable with them. And then also I think that there will be some time that overtime is incurred as a result of this mandatory training people have to go to. And you may be thinking like, oh, it's a day training or a half day training. I imagine it's something a little bit more in depth. We need to do some workshop type stuff, which is not always comfortable for every employee, but if we're doing things in association like a DISC profile, like the Myers-Briggs type thing, that's important for self-awareness. How do I talk? How do I communicate? And oh, by the way, other people talk and communicate differently than me, and how do we bring awareness to that as you're dealing with customers? So it will be a few days of training. It might be more for leaders, so we're really indoctrinated and really know a lot. And then maybe as we go through the organization, new hires, right, not being in the culture may not need as much. So there may be some overtime that we would supplement with that. And so our next steps, we believe, is for Mark and HR to draft an RFP and put it out there to see who may be interested in it. I already know 3 or 4 people or organizations that have contacted me as they know that this is kind of brewing that are interested. The selection of a firm, and then of course, the formation of this advisory committee. We talked about it in our last all-team meeting, and I got a big response already from it. I have about 10 people who want to be on it, so it may become a little bit more of a competitive process. We may have to restart, I guess. So I'm glad
Stay the course.
That's right. Stay the course, that's it. And so our question for you is if you support the removal of the proviso so we can move forward on this project, unless I can answer questions. Will you reach that point?
Looks good.
There would be a formal resolution on next agenda here for you to remove the proviso and thus to begin the process.
What was the dollar amount?
125.
125? Okay.
And you're going out to how many on your RFQ?
We'll advertise, so my guess is that we'll have probably over a dozen. It's my guess.
When do you hope to actually begin the work with your target?
Well, let's see, what time is it? Well, I'd say shortly after the first of the year. Of course, the RFP will have to go out, but I think the steering committee internal, we're going to work on that. And my hope is to start this thing certainly in the first quarter of next year.
Well, 25's a hard ceiling. You're not going to be coming back and saying, we need another 75 to do this.
No, you know they will.
You know they will.
No, no is the answer.
Okay.
No new taxes.
We all know how that ended.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Noel.
Thanks, Noel.
Thank you.
Okay, our next is the Envision Littleton Comprehensive Plan Project and 2019 Budget Proviso. So, oh, here they all come. Here they all come.
You can squeeze by there.
Yes, yeah, that's all that was all about.
Need a couple of
Okay, who's kicking this off?
Noel.
City staff,
Yeah, no, well.
Yeah.
the old timer.
Tiffany's been here longer.
That's right.
That's right. That's true. That's true.
Don't forget me.
She just keeps everything so fresh, and it seems like.
Thanks for the reading.
Oh, do you like it?
I haven't started it
It's
yet.
a very pretty cover.
Good for the long holiday.
Yeah, and I don't want
By
to
the
see
fire.
any council member wrapping it as a white elephant.
That's a really good idea.
There are some really great pictures in there.
There are.
You
That's
did
what I
actually
love.
pick out the pictures.
So we're ready. On behalf of my esteemed colleagues, we're excited to present to you an overview of the comp plan and the transportation master plan and some budgetary conversation around that. So generally our discussion topics, quickly to highlight the coordinated phases, share the scope of work for the comp plan. Keith will provide an overview of the transportation master plan, and Tiffany will discuss the budget for both. Quickly, as you all remember from November 13th, just to provide context on what we will actually get from a comp plan, and that will be a policy framework for Littleton for moving forward, as shown on this slide. What are the merits of undertaking a comprehensive plan and a transportation master plan in coordination? It really is about an integrated process and an integrated outcome. This is really important, especially with the aggressive timeline that we've identified for this project. The other piece that we wanted to note on this particular slide was about we do have the team in place, and we feel confident that we will be able to deliver. And then why, and a recap of how and why we can deliver, and that is based on the creation of this 5-phase process that we'll be using for both the comprehensive plan and the transportation master plan. As you've seen in previous discussions. This is a high-level overview of how we intend to keep everyone on the same page, and you'll notice it's multiple layers, and really it is an iterative process. If you look at the top here and descending, the process management team is really there about the tactics for these projects. The leadership meetings and that team is really about the strategy to lead us forward in the process. And then community coordinating committee, that's about input and feedback. And then public events, of course, that's about feedback. And we will have multiple opportunities for feedback during this process, and it really is about building on the work that we've put in place this year to keep that momentum and moving forward to make sure we're including a lot of community members in this conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Keith.
You don't need to scooch away. I can
Oh,
get up there. It's okay.
My glasses.
Keith Reister, Public Works Director. So, as we've talked before on a couple of different occasions about a transportation master plan, we do not have one here. And some of the things that we're going to undertake in that is, a lot of it's really based on the land use model that we have here in the community, which is why it's so tied to the comp plan to start with. Out of that, you do, traffic modeling, you do impact studies for both mobility and congestion. You look at down the road where you're going to need to be to have the capacity you need going forward. Allows you to build your impact fees around that. One of the things that we've never had here is a level of service standard, and I don't want to dive into level of service for intersections right now because we need about 40 different diagrams. Even Mark could be going, okay, I have enough of that. But, a level of service that I always compare it on the landscaping side, you have a difference between leaving it running like wild weeds, and at the other end, you've got Augusta National Golf Course. And those are all different levels of service, and they cost different things, and that makes a difference. Similarly, in what you choose to do in transportation. Like, for example, CDOT is standard as D on the letter scale, and they're willing to let it go to F, peak hour. Some cities, Fort Collins, for example, has C as their baseline standard, which in turn drives their fees and how they design things. And then out of all of that, you're going to be able to look ahead and say, over the next 25 years, this is where we need to go. This is what that model looks like. In general terms, these are the projects we're going to need to get there. And these are the costs of those projects in today's dollars. And how you look at that allow you to frame the decision-making, the community conversation. I do want to say that, to put it in context here, Arapahoe County, you'll see some numbers here in a few minutes. Arapahoe County is getting ready to put out their RFP for their transportation master plan update, just the update, and they budgeted $700,000 for that project. We are starting from scratch. We have nothing here. And actually, it's interesting because we got a lot of feedback from the consultants out there in the marketplace that they were actually really excited about the potential to do this job, because the only time they ever do things now is they do updates. They never get to do plans from scratch. So they, from a transportation, nerd standpoint, it was one of those really exciting things that came out of the
Pro bono, maybe.
Seriously, that's
It's like
that exciting.
rare opportunity.
exactly right. Yeah. So, that's kind of where we're coming from. I feel like as we've gone through the selection process, we have a really competent team across the board that brings a lot to the table. And we're confident that we're going to be able to get there if we can stay on timeline.
I have a question at this point. Mark, you did a Gantt chart a while back, about a year ago.
Yes.
With milestones. I know, I get goosebumps too.
Remember that.
But with the milestones and all that stuff. Where are we? And you probably don't have it tonight, but maybe sometime in the near future, you can give us an update on where we are on that, with all the different things you have going on right now, including adding this transportation piece in.
Yes, we have maybe at the retreat I'll bring all sorts of Gantt charts for you, but certainly, and we do intend probably to get in a little more detail about the comp plan. But actually we're right on track, and I think tonight's discussion, and this is again related to a budget proviso to kind of keep this process rolling, but we're right on track. And we do have we had a discussion with HDR and Kendrick Keast here to try to lay out a much more detailed schedule. Correct me if I'm wrong, we had that meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so that Gantt chart, I haven't even seen that one yet. I've seen the kind of a higher oversight of that overview. But I'd be more than happy to share that with council, because in my view, this is the kind of work that has to be done on a project of this magnitude so that we can identify all of the certain milestones that need to occur and who's doing what and when. Otherwise, I think we just leave it to chance to get to the October date and for council to be successful. So we can't afford that. This is too difficult of a project here. So that's why I want to be able to structure it in that fashion.
I guess what I was looking for to say, yeah, I can bring you in.
That's the short answer. Okay, yes, I will bring that.
Old bucket load up sounds like.
HDR is the consultant that's doing the transportation plan?
Correct.
And they've worked on other things? I feel like
They're doing the Mineral and Santa Fe design work for us. One of the things that when we went through the selection process, we narrowed it down to 4 finalist firms. And one of the things we liked about HDR, which you'll see reflected here in the next few slides, is they're, as an engineering firm, they have their own standalone public engagement communications division, which is in addition to their engineering skill set. And that, we have found that to be an important, obviously it's an important component for a project like this, and that was one of the differentiators as we went through the selection process.
one less organization to coordinate with, that's all.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think on the comprehensive plan, the piece that KKC can bring forward and what we recognized during the vision process is that we really wanted to make sure there was a local component to helping coordinate that. So HDR brings that ability to do that as well.
So now we'll talk about the numbers a little bit. One thing that I think is important for us to understand is that currently in our budget, we have $580,000 for the Transportation Master Plan and some community engagement. The $400,000 is tied to a budget proviso, which is one of the asks this evening is if we can move forward with releasing that on December 18th. And one important piece that we kind of touched on already is this project management and public engagement piece. This is going to be a new piece that's part of the whole project. So we're going to have the comprehensive master plan, we're going to have the transportation master plan, and then we're going to have some project management and some public engagement, and that piece is kind of new. So you haven't seen that part yet. But in order for this project to be fully successful, we need that piece to kind of tie both plans together. And so with that does come additional funding requests. But looking through the detailed information, we can fund that additional piece out of the transportation impact fees because it's directly related to the transportation master plan to manage those. And so essentially the ask of council for a budget amendment would be the additional $178,000 from the transportation impact fees. And based on where we're going to end in 2018 and our projections for 2019, and in addition with council increasing the transportation impact fee rate this next year, there's going to be enough funding in that transportation impact fee fund to cover this additional $178,000. What that also does is that kind of reduces the amount that we would be paying out of the general fund. So it frees up about $38,000 from the general fund. So that $430,000 that we had originally out of the general fund, it frees that up a little. And the main reason for that is because the comprehensive master plan actually came in under where we expected it to be. We budgeted $400,000 and it's actually going to come in at $342,000. So we have
Comprehensive plan.
I'm sorry.
The comprehensive plan?
Yes, yes. So that's what's going to allow us to have some additional funds in the general fund for the whole project. So essentially, that additional project management and public engagement piece is new, and that's what we'll be funding out of impact fees and saving some from the general fund.
So the negative 18K is what?
So that basically is just reducing the amount that we had in the general fund and for the comp plan and moving it over to the public engagement piece in the general fund. So that column that's going to be funded for that particular piece of the project. If that makes sense. So instead of using it for the comp plan, we're going to be using it for this project management and public engagement piece.
Explain a little bit the project management and public engagement. What's that? And I guess both general fund and impact fees. Well, impact fees, I guess.
So I think that's actually on the next slide.
Well, it is on the comprehensive plan piece. Keith can speak to that. On the community engagement piece, like we were alluding to earlier, one of the things we're recognizing that we need to make sure happens with this piece of the processes moving forward is that building on the success that we had in this year with the engagement in that high level of community input, we really wanted to make that a focus. So, and we also recognize that it's a short, aggressive timeline, and we wanted to consolidate that. So that is one of the reasons why HDR was really a great opportunity for us, because they can help facilitate that engagement for both the comp plan side as well as the transportation piece.
So as I look at this, as I now understand the numbers better, initially this project, which includes both the comp plan and the transportation master plan, was going to be $580,000, and now it is $758,000.
It's actually $719,000, but we just have a little bit of extra money left over in the general fund.
So it's 700 plus. And the components that make up the 700,000 are the comp plan is going to be 380, the transportation plan is going to be 200,000, and public engagement is going to be 160,000. So are those kind of like the three buckets that we're looking at here?
Yes.
The incrementality is primarily the public engagement.
Yes, that and a portion of the transportation master plan itself.
Why did we miss this before? I mean, it's a little, it's difficult to come back just 2 months after we've gone through our budget sessions and we've made decisions not to fund certain things. And now, and 2 months ago.
Well, I can speak to the transportation master plan. The reason we budgeted is because that's all we had in the impact fee fund. And I couldn't put an RFP on the street without money in the fund. So that's why we put it in there. And if you look back to when we talked about this, I said that I expected it to be higher. So when we went out and we did the RFP, we ended up really, for the transportation master plan, including a public engagement component by itself, that number was around $275,000. And at the same time, the comp plan is having a public engagement component, and so we brought those together. So if we put the public engagement back in the transportation impact, the transportation plan, that's going to be somewhere around $280,000. So by consolidating with the other two, we're just bringing those together under one umbrella.
I think I'm just asking but you didn't bring that to us in September when we went through the budget. So regardless of which fund it came from, if we knew the cost was going to be to whatever, I'm just not understanding why we're having this conversation.
Well, if I may, here's why. I think the aggressive nature of this project requires us to do kind of several things over time. And so the budget process in September, we put placeholders in there, not knowing the true cost of this because the RFP was still out on the street. And so that's why we're here now, is because we've had the time to kind of go through that process. If we had stepped back and done this thing differently and had more time, then yes, we would have done all this work way before we would have had the budget process. But again, in order to meet October of next year, that's why these things had to go in the sequence.
We didn't put the RFP on the street for the transportation plan until after the budget was done.
Yeah.
Long after the budget was done in October.
And so we didn't know what the full costs were at that point.
Are we getting any efficiencies, the public engagement that we're also doing with the comp plan? I mean, again, it's a lot of money. And besides that, there's probably public fatigue could be building substantially if we're running all of these things on separate tracks.
Yeah, having, like, for example, the public engagement for the comp plan and the transportation master plan, having them run through the same operation so that you're not double booking, in essence, you're not overloading, is really an efficiency factor, both for doing the work, but also for the people on the other side that are engaging in our community, so that it helps work towards avoiding that. There may be some of that, but that's the challenge in a short cycle. So.
Peggy?
I keep having some kind of challenge with this whole business. I'm looking at how much it's costing us to do the planning, to get it all done, and then we don't have diddly money to do any of it. Where are we going to get money? And I know we talked about partners helping with different kinds of things, but this will happen, I'm sure, several years following my exit from council next year. But where do we see the money coming to even start doing anything?
Well, from my view, we won't have an opportunity to get any money unless we complete a transportation master plan. So that's a way for us to articulate to the transportation community, those who fund us, where our problems are and the work that we've done to identify that. So in essence, you have to do this before you ask for money. And so I think that process, asking for money, obviously is a very difficult challenge in trying to get into the sequence here with Dr. Cog and the like. And I think, no doubt, at your retreat, you're going to talk about how do we prepare ourselves to ultimately get the share of our share to contribute to a project. Keith Reister here, of course, he's talked about, 20% is a kind of a bottom line number you need to be prepared to fund in any project that you ask for state and federal funds. And so right now, you're right. We do not have the money to fund those projects. And so our citizens obviously expect us to deal with problems on Santa Fe as the example, state highway. but our citizens still expect us to somehow facilitate an answer to that, or Broadway, or Littleton Boulevard, or whatever it might be. Those are our challenges. That's what our comp plan is going to identify. That's what the transportation master plan will identify, and then we can start having the conversation about how are we going to get to an end that we can manage.
On a smaller scale, won't these plans help with the additional $3+ million for street maintenance? Figure out what to prioritize if we have a...
To some degree, yeah, I think they'll certainly influence that. The $3+ million is really kind of the maintenance piece here, but there's still, kind of capacity rolled up in some of the work that we will do, and so that needs to be identified, and through a TMP will help us, spot those areas. The level of service that Keith was touching on, that's the conversation that the TMP will identify, so we can see over time where do the areas fail, and then help us understand what is it going to cost to get to that point.
Brandon?
How much have we spent on project management and public engagement thus far for the Envision plan? Because we've done a lot there. Just for perspective of, how much have we spent thus far? How much more are we expecting to spend? Because this is what we're expecting to spend additionally, correct?
Correct, yes. Well, recognizing off the top of my head, the entire budget was around $100,000 that we allocated for KKC. And within that, honestly, I'm not going to be able to tell you, but I would say 20%, probably 30% of that was what we paid to have them provide some of that. And then also, as you know, we have staff that are also helping facilitate and manage the overall engagement piece as well.
So thus far, we've done a great job. We reached a lot of people. Some of the things that we heard from the Envision process of the level of engagement for our size of our community, et cetera. So we accomplished that with 20,000, and here we're asking for 150.
Well, and you know what, I probably shouldn't overspeak that because the engagement was a big piece, right, of the vision, because it really was getting out to the community. So in fairness, I probably shouldn't guess that, and I can give you more details. However, I think the piece that's really important is the vision was, the process was asking people, what is our future, what is our vision, recognizing that comprehensive plan, brings it to another level of complexity. Now we are really talking about details and topics and data and bringing that forward, so that is a different level of engagement needs relative to making sure the timelines and the Gantt charts and every detail is laid out ahead of schedule, so that it is following every piece and step of the way, so that we meet those goals and timelines along the way, and we bring the community along as well. So it is different and more, I think it points to the need why we felt HDR really is going to be able to bring that expertise and that coordination piece, again, to manage it within that timeline, because the way we've laid out this process, it is October that draft comp plan and transportation plan does come forward to you all as the decision makers. So it really is a lot, and it is the key piece to make this a successful outcome.
I think I'd add to that from the perspective of, say, the transportation side, is that the type of public engagement that went on with the vision is different than the public engagement you need on the transportation side. For example, when you get into it, and we talked earlier this year, for example, about traffic calming, and say Mineral and Platte Canyon, that was 6 public engagement meetings just to talk about one intersection. And so when we start talking about that kind of detail, when we talk about, for example, what does the Santa Fe corridor look like from a land use standpoint, that's a different kind of public engagement that takes place as you go through that process. A, it's more frequent. B, you've got a lot more materials and exhibit that you have to go with. Plus, you have to use all your available tools, which includes social media, other platforms, all those kind of things. So to me, there's a different level of different detail on the ground that is just necessary, especially when you start talking about things like capacity in our business, and what does that mean for somebody that's stuck at an intersection at 4:52 PM for 3 light cycles.
I don't question at all the need for this, and I think this is a necessary and important project, and the level of public engagement has to be there. What I'm struggling with is, how we are approaching this from a funding. And, we're going through priority-based budgeting for that purpose, to identify where we should stop spending money so we can spend the money where the priority is. So is there anything more that we can pull from out of priority-based budgeting so that we could do these incremental things? And if council was to say no, what would happen? Would we change the scope? Would this take longer? So if the answer was no tonight, what would be the impact?
Go ahead, I get
longer.
I think that's the answer. The answer definitely is longer. And for us, that would, in transportation side, it would reduce the quality of the modeling and the work that took place. Those would be the 2 implications for us.
I think it could impact future funding efforts that we might have, because like Mark said, if we don't have the transportation master plan, there's a lot of funding that we may not be eligible for future projects. So I think that's a big piece of it too.
And I think for the comprehensive plan too, remember the other piece that was really important is that the data and input collected, it is about turning it into data. So we really have a different model for how we're collecting input and how we're then turning that into data so that it can be used to analyze and make sure that decision points that we're providing or the information in the document is meeting community expectations. So that's another level of analysis regarding that.
Carol? Back to the explanation of the difference between the envision and what we're trying to do now. What I see, and I'm testing this to see if I'm looking at it right, is with envision, it was collecting ideas and recording those, which is a fairly open and not restricted thing to do. Where we're moving now is to specific applications that have serious and necessary technological limitations. So it takes a very much higher level of skill, both for the deliverable and for the listening to people dealing with what can be done. Because with the envision, it was everything's possible. Just tell us your ideas. Now, like with your thing with the street intersection, everything isn't possible.
Oh, we have unlimited money. We can do whatever we want. It's no problem whatsoever.
Carol, I think that's well said, really. I think what we're going to be experiencing here this next year is kind of a level of participation here from our citizens that we haven't seen before. We're going to be talking about not only policy issues from a land use standpoint, but we're going to be able to demonstrate the effects of that on the transportation side or other kinds of issues, economic development or housing, where it might be. But the combination of all of that, people are going to see proposals in their front yard, literally, and I think the level of engagement and the level of interest will be much higher because now it affects, they can see directly the impact of these decisions. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people weigh in on this. I think it's exciting, but at the same time, I think you're starting to maybe fully appreciate this is really going to be a significant challenge so that our citizens don't have fatigue, so that the community meetings are truly integrated between these 2 plans here, and it's works seamlessly through time here. That's the big challenge I see.
Well, I think what you're also seeing, in many ways, is a lot of the reason why this hasn't been done, because this isn't easy stuff and it's not inexpensive, and we put an extra burden on it in terms of timeline. So, the old good, fast, cheap, pick 2. But I think that's important because part of why we have a bit of why we put a deadline on this is because having not done anything for as long as we did nothing has put us in a situation where we are dealing with problems that are almost bigger than we can fix in the next 2 or 3 years, and dollars that we can't even imagine. And so it's kind of getting our head around all of that. And I think one of the things that is, what Carol was saying, I totally agree. The comp plan is kind of that dream, and people can imagine, oh yeah, I would love to have a park over here, or I would love to have this kind of shopping down, 10 miles over that way, and those types of things. But when it comes to this, it's what's happening on my street in front of me, what's happening on my route to school and to work. It's personal. And so the outreach will go deeper, and it will take longer, and there'll be more processing of that outreach. So I think that fortunately, the impact fees, once again, are showing the benefit that they are. And I think that this isn't as painful as I thought it would be. It still hurts. But it's one of those things. It's like, yeah, would I rather go buy something else with this? Yeah, I don't like buying hot water heaters. I like buying sofas. But this is important. If we do not do this, and if it doesn't, and it has to start quickly, because we've lost so many opportunities. So many communities around us have been able to capitalize on federal money and on other money that's been available out there. And some of that stuff has dried up, and others that's available will dry up. And so we are late to the game, but we're getting in the game. And so I think that's what's most important. And what Peggy alluded to is hugely important, and that will be at our workshop, because we have to plan for how we're going to respond to what the community is saying. We know, we've been told for 5 years where this cliff is at, and it is our roads and it is our infrastructure that is going to push us over this cliff. And so we're solving that problem right now. And like I said, it's not easy and it's tough stuff, but I think this is the council to do it. So I think, was there another comment, question from anyone? Okay, you want to go ahead?
Quickly now on the comprehensive plan and that scope, we wanted to make sure to be very clear about the deliverables and the approach that we wanted KKC to use in this process. Similarly to how you saw the scope of work for the vision, you have that scope of work in front of you this evening, and there are a couple things I wanted to just briefly point out. That it's a product of, this was really important, I think, it's a product of, we spent a lot of time working with KKC to create this scope of work. And it's not just a template or off the shelf. It really was important to staff and myself that we customize it to what we need in Littleton. So we really feel that we ended up with a really positive scope of work that will get us the outcome that you all are expecting from that, as well as the community. Who wrote the scope? So the scope was written in coordination with staff, myself and Kathleen Osher, as well as Ken McKee's staff.
That was one of, as I was reading it, I was wondering who would actually put it, because it looked like somebody else put together, not us. That's what I was thinking. But
it's in coordination with us, because that is one of the important pieces, that we create a document that is, we're a partner to continue how the envision and how the vision process went forward. It is about being a partner, not just turning it over to the consultant for them to do that. And then, you'll notice here the steps 1 through 4, these do follow the previous slide, the phases. So that also was a really important piece, and number 5 is not listed on here, but that would be phase 5, which would be bringing the document forward for adoption. And then one other piece that was also central to the success to date, and that is regarding the public engagement, as we were just talking about. And these hallmarks from 2018, it is the intention to carry it forward, these strategies in 2019. And we've talked about these in the past, but this is the overall list that was also really important to embed within the structure of the scope of work. And then that leads us to the main question in front of you all tonight, and that's whether you support proceeding with the next phases of the comprehensive plan, including the transportation master plan and the budget discussions we had, thereby releasing the 2019 budget proviso for the comp plan.
The 2019 budget proviso was how much?
400,000. So the intention.
Any issues? Okay. Go forth and prosper. Tiffany, did you want to pass the close? No? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
That looks really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was quite a scope too.
Wow.
And I'm going to bring my Gantt chart for the retreat.
Real quick, Keith, how long did it take to build our impact fees up to 150,000? Was that just 1 year?
We had 150 coming into this year. We actually had closer to 140.
Okay.
As I think I discussed when we were doing the impact fees here, our impact fees have only been in place since 14, and they're relative to our peers are relatively low.
Right.
And so, this year, as Tiffany said, we expect to be in that 170 plus range, 200 range in there. So that's based on a projection of development plus what the fees are. Somebody like, if you went to say build a 100,000 square foot warehouse in Fort Collins, you're going to pay well over 100 just for that project. In impact fees, for example.
Transportation or distribution center up there,
Republic National.
Public National, thank you. I mean, that I would think would have huge impact fees.
Should.
Yes, they
If it was in Fort Collins. If it was in Fort Collins, yes. Not in Littleton, because what you were saying, like Fort Collins would be like 100 and something thousand. What would it be comparable to Littleton?
I don't know that off the top of my head, Jerry. I have to get back to you on that one.
If you
But
had
it's
to
not, I would guess it's probably going to be less than 15.
50, yeah.
guess. Exactly. That's exactly. See, that's why if it was in Fort Collins, their impact fees are already up there. That's what they should be. And we are not.
Well, we
We're
did
getting
make,
there.
yes, in fact, council's already approved the increase on the transportation side. It's 1,200 now, is that roughly?
About 1,050, 1,000.
Okay, 1,100, okay. Yeah, and Keith touched on this, the conclusion of the transportation master plan will have a much more logical approach to impact fees that you can be very precise on the amount, and I'm confident it will be a good discussion with council, let me just say that.
Good, you like the good ones. You know what that means. All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Council, our next agenda item, and unless anybody wants a break, we'll just go ahead. We are ahead of schedule, moving along nicely. It says update on the open space prioritization project, and Will Singleton is here to present. He's facilitating our group. He's been the facilitator with the South Platte Working Group since its inception. And Will, I think, you do the Highline also?
I did the Highline until July
Okay.
of this year.
2018. So we have had, and we'll kind of, the intention here is to kind of update council in terms of I guess this is really a checkpoint. In the past, when we've done that, we did a task force where, and I think Peggy and Jerry will remember this, where we looked at open space opportunities and land purchases. And so we did checkpoints back to council just to make sure that we were staying within the intention of council and what, that you were going to get what your needs were met, that expectations would be realized when the report is given. So it's good to always just kind of have a checkpoint. So Will's going to kind of walk through a little bit of that. The intention tonight is if you have some questions about process, Will can kind of work through those. If you have questions that would relate to the work and the thinking that the task force is doing, we will make a note of that, bring it back to a task force meeting, and that will have to be processed through the task force. And we actually, do we meet Friday?
We do.
Okay, so we have a meeting Friday so we can work through anything that you might have. Other than that, this is just kind of an update on process, what we're doing, get some touch points, and kind of share some information, so.
It's actually, it should be a different, it shouldn't look like this. It should look like
It's gonna look like that's pretty good. I like that.
yeah, so
That was pretty good. I like that.
This was in your packet.
Yes.
Right, well, what you see here is actually what was in the packet, but I actually sent a different show to Becky and asked her to see.
Apologize, Will, it never got corrected.
If you have it on there, I might be able to.
Yeah, I've got it right here. But I can talk, I can't do two things at once, but while he's doing this, hold on a second.
We'll let Tyler, the technical whiz here, if you don't mind, Mayor, just.
I've got a adapter. I do have an adapter, yeah.
Did you give him his thing?
I don't have an adapter.
I go upstairs, I can run up there, I'll be right back.
Okay, so let me just tell you really quickly what I'm hoping to do today. And that is, as part of the scope of the work that we're doing, I am supposed to come and talk to you all about what the range of studies are and why they're significant, and to try to synthesize them so that you all have a foundation of knowledge as the task force is moving towards producing its report. And so that's really what I'm here to do today, is just to sort of review with you all the studies that were in the packet that you sent, but then also try to link them up with each other and hopefully have a discussion about why they might lead to some recommendations from the task force that might plausibly make sense. So just as a quick review, the task force is a follow-on to 2012 report that was written by a previous task force. And that previous task force was, Mayor Brinkman was on that group, Charlie Boston was on that group, but there were also individuals from South Suburban and from Arapahoe County, South Metro Land Conservancy. It was a good range of people, but the focus really was on, the focus was on trying to prioritize the purchases of land for open space or parks. And the issue was that there were just lots of opportunities out there, and council at the time did not have the basis to figure out how to prioritize that. And from talking to here, let me get it for you. Let's see if I can get this. Just hold on. Oh, I see what you. So this transmits it.
Yeah, if I can get it to.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little distracted here.
Sorry.
So the task force really feels like the recommendations that were put forward in 2012 or 2013 about how you prioritize the purchase of parcels is still pretty good. The tension is that $4 million that's in the open space fund and annual sort of money that comes in from the county, and how to split that up among other uses. And so it's out of that it becomes kind of more complicated. And so the Littleton Open Spaces and Parks Task Force currently has Mayor Brinkman, Mike Broughton with South Suburban, oh, here we go, Parks and Recreation. We have Josh Tennyson, who's the grants manager with Arapahoe County Open Space. We have Keith Reister, who is just here, and you know. We have Hillary Merritt, who is a manager with the Trust for Public Land in Colorado, and then Bill Nagel, who's he owns the bike store there on.
Well, he used to, but
used to. Okay. Yeah. So the task that we were given by you all was really to update the criteria for prioritization, reflecting the developments of the last 7 years, including the numerous studies and plans. Right. So that's what we're going to try to do, and I'll just say that all the plans that were in your packet were basically identified by the task force because of the task force scope and the significant input from stakeholders. So the plans that we're going to be talking about really all had exactly what you all were talking about, is the public engagement and the sort of a good process to bring these issues and ideas forward. I would say that it's important to realize that the plans and studies really do build on each other. It's not an array of different plans. They actually build from one to the next, and I'll pick that up here in a minute. Some of the plans have very broad scope, such as the South Suburban Parks and Recreation Master Plan. It's for the entire district. Others are very focused, such as the Arapahoe County Bike Ped Master Plan, which is really only about one particular issue. Both can be effective, and they both kind of are flowing into this pool of good studies that are currently available for this decision making. Some have an exclusive Littleton focus, and they're important. But the ones that don't, that are sort of more broadly formed, are really indicators of where there are leveraging opportunities from the agencies that funded those studies, right? So Arapahoe County and South Suburban have their own studies, and where you can find that alignment in the projects, that's where your leveraging opportunities are, and that's where you can get the most bang for the $4 million that's on hand. Okay, so as in the packet that you received last week, really all those points came from the task force members. I didn't do it myself. But the themes of the studies that are out there that are relevant really have to do with land acquisition, and it's not just for open space. It's the purchase of land for parks, habitat enhancement, and open space. A lot of the parcels that are possible to be purchased or have been purchased actually could be good parks. So it's not just open space. It's not just preventing development from occurring. It's a proactive measure. Park development is the investment in actually developing those parks. Amenity renewal is enhancing or repairing or modernizing assets that are good for recreation. River restoration and habitat is something that's very important along the South Platte, and that's really about resilience and aesthetics. Multimodal connectivity, bike and pedestrian connectivity, and then integrative economic development is another theme that we saw. So all of these basically, you're going to see why I did these lines. Essentially, we go from a period of time, 2013 to 2019, and those themes, acquisition, parks, amenity renewal, habitat restoration, connectivity, and development, are echoed through the studies. And the big circle is the major focus, and the small circle is like just part of the plan. And if it's in bold, it just means that Littleton was the exclusive focus of that study. So the first one that I'll reference is really that open space and parks task force report that was written, and it was really only about acquisition. And the second one is the South Platte Corridor Vision Plan, which is the result of a charrette that was done in 2013. It was done by, it was really driven by the South Platte Working Group, and was done by Stream Associates. And I think that Mayor Brinkman likes that report. I think it's satisfying in a lot of ways, because it does provide a very good integrated look at what can happen along the South Platte. And it covers both quick wins and long-term thinking. It covers a range of different issues and themes, including habitat and natural areas, and connectivity, and education, culture, the identity of that area, land use and economic development. It really captures a lot of the thinking of of the leaders at the time in 2013 about what could happen along the South Platte. So it did include some recommended action for habitat improvement and multimodal connectivity. You'll find that it encourages trailhead access along Santa Fe and the Littles Creek Trail connection, and integration of Hudson Gardens into the Mary Carter Greenway. And it also really advocates for land use and economic development, including at Bellevue and Bowles to Mineral. So that was a successful effort, and it was actually used then to drive, in part, the Hudson Gardens master plan, which...
I'm sorry, what did you say, Bellevue to Bowles? One more time, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Bellevue to Bowles to Mineral.
Right, Bellevue and Bowles, and then Bowles to Mineral. And it was thinking about those two zones as areas for economic opportunity to integrate towards the river rather than away from the river, and that was one of the sort of objectives of the South Platte Working Group as it sort of entered into its second phase 10 years ago or something like that. And that was to reorient towards the river rather than treating the river like a junkyard.
Thank you.
So the Hudson Gardens, I don't know what that is there for. Oh, there we go. Hudson Gardens master plan is really a focused plan that you all are aware of, and it was brought forward by Mike Broughton as he was thinking about significant plans. And it's really because Hudson Gardens is an integrated amenity, which is very significant along the South Platte. The city of Littleton has been an important partner in efforts for the Hudson Gardens, and it was a funding partner of the master plan that was developed in 2014. And I think for the purposes of what we're talking about, it really advocated for, again, developing the land that they have as a park amenity, and then also to renew some of the facilities that they have there. But then, importantly, I think it was really thinking about connectivity to the Mary Carter Greenway and along South Santa Fe and how to improve that, and to think about Hudson Gardens not as an island in the city, but as an integrated asset for the citizens of Littleton. So the third study is the Littleton Open Space and Parks Trails Master Plan 2016, and Keith in a task force meeting really pointed out that in 2016 the council adopted the master plan and made it the guiding document for staff. So that's the document that staff follows when they're thinking about parks, trails, and open space. And so it was really effective, actually, in building from previous studies, but also includes a lot of community priorities and had a lot of public engagement. And it was really much broader, had a broad framework, so you can see it pretty much covered everything. And it served as an important tee-up for the South Suburban Park and Recreation District Master Plan in 2017. So, as you all know, South Suburban covers a number of municipalities and metro districts, and what it does is tries to balance all of the different priorities of its client cities. But what it did was it drew from the Littleton master plan and included those major projects in its own, while still reflecting its perspective on parks development, really renewing a lot of the amenities that are available, and that had been aging and were perhaps highly used, and then emphasizing connectivity. And so, yeah, I think that one thing that's important to note is that it was adopted by the South Suburban Board of Directors and is the policy of South Suburban. So if you find that there's, you guys, I'm losing all of you. If you find that the project is not, if you find the project is carried forward in the Littleton document and the South Suburban document, you have a leveraging opportunity. Okay, so last one that I want to talk about is the bike ped master plan that was done in 2017 by Arapahoe County. It's significant because it actually lays out a number of capital projects that Arapahoe County is willing to help pay for that will help for bicycle and pedestrian connectivity going through Littleton. And it's part of a larger study, but it does focus on Littleton projects, and widening the Mary Carter Greenway is a priority. It also talks about making connection at Little's Creek Trail and at Big Dry Creek Trail north of Bellevue, and then grade separated priority projects along the railroad and Highline Canal. So all these projects taken together, they build towards each other, and if you want to talk about a particular type of project and how to find its relevancy and its legitimacy, there are studies that can lay that out for you. There are plans that will lay that out for you. It doesn't have to be a mystery how to prioritize among the projects that are available. And really what the task force is likely going to do is to look at how leveraging funding can draw from those strategies, how you can combine South Suburban with Arapahoe County with the proclivities of GOCO, and think about how to maximize that Littleton dollars. And because more potential partners, the better better option you have for leveraging funds. And I would also say that identifying projects that advance multiple objectives at the same time is important and is likely going to be a prioritizing factor. And then I just wanted to mention that South Suburban is very interested in facilities upgrades, and then there will also be an east-west connection study that's coming along in early 2019. There are 7 crossings to the South Platte from Littleton that are being, 7 crossings in Arapahoe County, and I think 3 are here in Littleton, or 2 or 3, that have been studied by FHU, and that could be very useful.
You mean like Bellevue, Mineral, what kind of crossings?
Little's Creek, and then...
It's trail crossings.
Access trail crossings. Yeah, so the next steps for the task force is we're drafting a report. I did it on the plane this morning to some degree, and they're going to be developing new recommendations about how to think about spending on those other objectives in addition to just acquisition, and what the proportionate share of funds might need to be. Just make some recommendations, and I've actually asked the task force to send me their thoughts, like how would you split it up, and we're going to talk about that on Friday and see if we can have some consensus. It's pretty good. There was pretty good similarities there, so it's not crazy, disparate. And then we'll be back in January to essentially present the report to you, late January, and answer whatever questions you have, and hear about whether you all think that report is sufficient. So,
Questions? Karina?
Can you go back to the slide that had all the circles on it? So here, looking at the various, organizations up on top, or the purpose, you could see, makes sense that the South Platte Corridor vision would put its greatest focus and prioritization on habitat and restoration versus Arapahoe Bike and Ped Master Plan. And so is part of the work that the task force is doing, when you talk about prioritization to achieve what? Like, how are you developing what, how to prioritize?
Right. Yeah, so the challenge for, I think, as I understand it, for Littleton, with the $4 million that is currently in the hopper of available open space funds, is that there's far more than $4 million worth of opportunities out there to enhance recreation, habitat, parks, and open space in Littleton. And so the prioritization is really about how do you navigate the spending of those funds and figure out why spending money on a set of, say, developing a park here is better than spending money on purchasing open space or widening a trail in some other part of town. And so essentially, I went to the task force and I said, okay, so let's talk about criteria for these different objectives, right? And what would make a project legitimate if it had, what would the criteria be if it was for an amenity renewal? And the fact of the matter is that these studies themselves have already applied the criteria that need to be applied. And so the question is, what projects flow through all of those studies, or many of them, and can capture leveraging funds? And it's that with the sort of the vetting that brings a strong sort of like a bad penny. It keeps coming up, a project that keeps coming up. And then the leveraging where you get a really good deal if you spend money on this project as opposed to that project is what probably will be arguments for prioritization. The prioritization has occurred. It happened in those studies that I just reviewed. And to ask the task force to then go and reprioritize is a little strange because you have this flood of input from the public and from experts. And so what this group is really trying to do is just synthesizing what those studies said and bring you a project list and tell you why the project list is legitimate based on what the studies said. And with their own 2 cents, of course.
There's actually 2 levels of prioritization. One we're seeing in these studies, which a lot of that is really what I would call more community input, and then as it drops into need, and where the public is saying, one of the reports, one of our reports that we do with the, I think it's the citizen survey, and they come back consistently and they want open space money for acquisition. They want to continue to purchase. So we're seeing, and that's fine. So that bubbles up as priority. We see, parks bubble up as priority, connectivity, all these different ones. And so how those kind of lay out. And then the second level of prioritization is how do we appropriate money to these? Okay, they're all important. They've all been determined that they are priorities. Some of them need to be done sooner than others. Some of them are a lot more expensive than others. Some of them it can be a $4 million project that we can spend $50,000 on and get leveraged with everything else. So we have to prioritize that with our prioritizing budget that we're going to be doing, but we'll at least have the bones that we need to be able to plug in those kind of.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
dollars.
So this prioritization was based on the originator, right? I mean, the intent of the first one was to identify the open space. So this is very logical, but the second layer is what I'm asking of, is how, what criteria are we now deciding to say, no, we're not going to do the amenity renewal, we're going to do the parks development.
Well, I think that, if you have a chunk of money and you're concerned about all the different priorities that are out there, and you don't want to spend too much on one objective versus another, I think that it creates a situation where decision making can be more difficult. So because what happens if you spend too much on amenity renewal and then a really wonderful open space parcel comes up and then you're out of cash and you're like, what do we do, right?
Absolutely, and that's exactly the discussion, sorry to interrupt, the discussions that we had during the budget session, why this even happened. Because we didn't know what we were giving up by approving this. So
Right.
I don't want us to start with, we only have 4 million to work with. I want us to start with, what is important to our community that we want to go after? And if that means we have to save for 3 years, or we have to find different partners, or we have to find money somewhere else, I think that's where we have to start, as opposed to, I'm hearing, and maybe I'm hearing incorrectly, that we're starting with 4 million and how we're going to spend 4 million, and I don't think we should be starting from there.
I agree. I think that leveraging is a major factor, and then money is going to keep coming in, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the if you compare habitat restoration with parks development, it's apples and oranges. It's hard to compare what's needed more. If you begin to think through what these some proportionate share of available funds and what their leveraging possibilities are, then you can say, okay, well, actually it's reasonable to spend a certain amount of money on this, and let's see where the opportunities lie, to bring in other partners, to see what we can do, and we're not foregoing the other objectives as well. And so I think that it's just a matter of trying to navigate how, having people like Josh and Hillary on hand to say, how would you navigate the decision-making for how to seize the best opportunities? And they keep turning back to the studies and the important projects that keep coming up. It's not a mystery what those projects are. And it's a matter of saying, yeah, we want to do that. We want to do that project, and this is how much out of that 4 million we think we can spend given the other priorities as well.
And I think, Karina, I totally agree with you on the 4 million. I think we have 4 million in there now, but I can tell you we don't. Because we have to pay South Suburban for park management, and we've got some, we promised money to them for something else, and so it all boils. What I like about the way that we're I think Friday we're going to dig deeper into this, is that it's like when you do your budget at home, it's like that pie, right? So X amount, we have to save X amount for the mortgage, X amount for food, X amount for a car. So it's not a dollar amount, it's more a percentage amount. And actually thinking about saving money, actually thinking about squirreling away money in that account that can be used when an acquisition comes up, because they come up fast and we don't know how much it's going to be. And if we are caught without any available, then we just lose the opportunity. And so we've never really looked at that fund that way. That fund has always just been looked at as a big pot of money that gets another $1 million tossed in every year. And that was part of our discussion, is that we really want to treat that differently. We want to look at that differently. And so this is going to help us be able to process that.
I think, going to Karina's point, not looking at the money first, just thinking of each of these as a filter. Think of an old overhead projector. You put them all on top and see where there's a synergy, where one matches up, and then we go, oh, can we afford this? Or if we can't afford that, where can we leverage money for?
Yes, absolutely.
It's just more of a filter going through.
And a lot of this is not even stuff that has to be done in any specific time frame. I know that there's some things that have some timeline to it, but it's stuff that we can literally plan 5 years out, and we can appropriate for that. And we know that there is additional money coming in, and then then everybody's expectations are met. What I love is that we're taking all these plans. We always complain about all these plans that we never use. But these plans are pretty actively referred to, and as we were all going through them, you can go through each one of those and check off a number of things that have been done. In fact, the charrette, that's one of the reasons why I love it so much, because it has been a guiding document to actually doing things, and we've done things. And I'm going to make sure you each get a copy of that charrette, because I think if you just take a look at it, there's a map on there, and it's got all the numbers along the river corridor, and you can
just go into the Littleton thing and see. And we did that, we did that, we did that, we did that. And so the plans are effective. Obviously, with the garbage in, garbage out, it was obviously good information into those plans because they're still, even 6 years later, they're still working.
Yeah, and I think that you're exactly right about sort of the overlays and seeing what rises to the top as a really high priority. And there's just a lot to be mined from these studies, and they actually do reflect the priorities of the community, because the community has been consulted on this stuff. So I think that it's a matter of weighing the careful budgeting with having enough money to seize opportunities when they come along. And that can be, I think that's the art that the task force can help navigate, because parcels do come available. You don't know when it's going to happen. You just really want that parcel, and you need to have enough money on hand to seize that opportunity. But you don't necessarily want to keep everything hoarded and not advance interests in other objectives. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's also part of the judicious use of the sales tax dollars, is that the citizens expect us to invest that money on a regular basis in the intended purpose of it. Other questions, comments?
Good.
So I met with David Marvin yesterday, and I did ask for this to be on the agenda. We've talked about that a couple of times. From a timing perspective, is it possible that we'll have his report? Is it still something that even if in draft form we can begin to talk about?
I don't think so. I looked at the schedule in our last meeting where we're going to be kind of, I think, finalizing the draft and sending Will off to do his work is the day before our workshop. So I think that we're looking probably more council seeing it in February.
Well, I would say that this is an opportunity for corrective measures from you all. We are thinking that we should not be writing a super long report for you, and that if the report is a good 6 pages with good information and analysis and perspective, then that's a good thing, right? It doesn't need to be an 18-page report. So on Friday, I plan to review what I've heard from the task force members and put into a report, which is about 6 pages. And it's possible, they haven't seen it yet, and it's possible that they'll say it's terrible, and they just say that they'll come to you and say, fire Will. But it's also possible that there would be some good things to work with there, and that we may have a draft report that we can provide key points or outlines for, and for you to have something to work with.
That may also be the opportunity for us to, in fact, look at a draft so that we can provide feedback to help you prepare the final report.
Well, there is a provision in the scope, which is that we will have some key people, such as Tom Wooten, who was on the previous task force, take a look at the report and give their comments, and then those comments go back to the task force, and the task force gets to think about whether those comments make sense in the context of what they're trying to say or not, and make the appropriate changes.
Yeah, and I think we want to send it to Urban Drainage and Flood Control, because there would be a huge funding partner. So I really have to push back a little bit that if it's ready and shows up for our retreat, that's great. But I really don't want to rush this. And I think that getting some of these other weigh-ins would be good. And I'm not entirely sure that I am 100% thinking that council's input on a draft is necessary. It's a report that we're doing to give to council. And I would rather have it in that final form back to council. We are here to get kind of your input on this. Are we in the right direction? Are we tracking along correctly? We could do another checkpoint in between now and the time of the report to make sure that there's
that we're balanced on that, but I would like to give council the final report. And Carol?
We have an advisory team that looks really, really strong in this expertise, and so it makes sense to have that group advise and then for council, unless we see something really seriously wrong, which I don't expect at all, to go ahead with what they suggest, because they're the experts. So it doesn't make sense for us to be messing with what they propose.
And if the report comes to council and it's not what you want, we'll go back to the...
Say so.
Oh,
Throw it in the shredder.
But I don't think that that's going to happen. I think we've got a pretty good grasp on this, and as you said, we've got an amazing team. And I have to tell you, the dialogue at the meetings is really good because it's very balanced. The consistency there is that there's just a real passion for this type of work, and there's depth and knowledge from these folks. So it's going to be quality stuff.
And so
could we move on?
Sure. One more question from Karina, and then we'll...
So what we'll do with this report is that then we will make the decision of how do we begin to implement and plan on executing against it. And so that's why a draft wouldn't be worth a discussion at the council retreat, because we don't have a final recommendation.
Yeah, I think so.
We're kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down, really.
Yeah.
That's how we are.
That's about all we want.
Jerry's just a thumb.
Just a Lord.
You're Caesar over there.
Yeah, exactly. No, well, my point is we're not here to discuss this and delay it. We're here to say, yes, we agree with this, or we don't agree.
Or
We'll
redo
use
what
it as
they
our
do.
tool. It's being provided as a tool. Yeah.
Right.
Will, anything else? Mark, you have?
Just quickly, just as a placeholder, we anticipate a February 12th study session to bring back the open space for the council discussion. I wanted to hold that opportunity, so that's kind of a target. And I think Keith in particular wants that discussion so that he can apply for grant opportunities shortly thereafter. It's important for the timing.
Yep. And this actually is a really important exercise for those grant opportunities. By having that comparative analysis of the studies and presenting you all and having you make decisions about what you think is important is a good accelerator for a lot of those grant makers, especially GOCO.
Yeah.
I don't know if you all saw the CML newsletter, and there was an opportunity for a grant for, I think it was for trails. And the deadline was yesterday. So it's those kind of things. I mean, right, it was the newsletter that came out 2 days before the grant was deadline, but this is what we always get stuck in. If we were ready to go, there's more money on the table that we would have an opportunity to grab at. So this will help with that.
All right.
Thanks, Will.
Good job,
Thank
Will.
you very much. Sorry to bore you at the beginning.
No, it was good.
And with the disjointed delivery, we were trying to get to anything.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Appreciate your
Technology.
attention, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, Will.
Okay, council, so just a couple quick things. Mark has a couple things on administrative updates. I think the city attorney might have one also. And I wanted to just, if spoken, I didn't get a chance to speak to Councilmember Cole due to her challenges today. But because of the length of the meeting on Tuesday is extraordinary. And I think a dozen public hearings, not all of them will be big, but it's still extraordinarily long. And the issue of the short-term rentals continues to be ever-changing and fluctuating, and I think that we're all in different stages of trying to get our head and hands around this. And so we're going to pull it off the agenda. It's not a quasi-judicial, so we don't have the same circumstances that we would with a quasi, which I'll explain one of those that we've got to deal with on Tuesday night too. But we can go ahead and pull that, and I think we need to get it pulled. We make sure it's publicly well-known that it's not going to be on the agenda, or I guess it will be on the agenda, we'll just table it. But that will be published pretty broadly, so, because we'll need to make a motion to table it to January 15th.
8th is the study session date.
Yeah, but we're tabling the public hearing to the 5th.
Okay, gotcha.
Are we on a time clock on that?
The only thing that's out there is the moratorium will expire on the 14th. But realistically, if somebody walks in on January and the 15th and applies for a license, it has to go down to zoning for a zoning clearance, and that's not going to happen the same day. So
We're probably safe, but
it is a drop dead date, though.
Well, you do need to basically, if you want to continue it, or you're thinking you want to continue it beyond the 15th, then you need to consider the moratorium.
And I think the intention is not to. I think we'd all like to get this thing settled as best we can, as soon as we can. On the 8th, what we would like, and happy to hear some input tonight if you guys have some different thoughts. If you would please take the ordinance that you have, that we had in first reading, I think it's 13 pages.
Yes.
And if you would not mind marking that up. If you have questions about something, if you have something you'd like to make an amendment to, if you have something you don't like, whatever it is, make notations, however you like to make notations, and get that to the city attorney no later than Monday. So nearly, almost a week. Get that to the city attorney on Monday, and the city attorney and his staff will go through that. And then on the 8th, that will be the conversation. So find things in there that are similarities, or find things that are not, and we will walk through each of those. We've got some other things that we're going to probably move off the 8th so that we'll be able to devote the time we need to this. Because what we want to make sure that we do is that we all feel as close to a level of comfort with the ordinance as we can. Doesn't mean that on the 15th that we can't make amendments or something like that, because we know we always can do that. But certainly, we are nowhere near ready for prime time on this at this point. So if you guys have any other thoughts or suggestions on how to move that through, I'm happy to hear them, but I think that's probably a talk to the city attorney, and that's nothing he also prefers.
Just a question on the process when we're going to be tabling this on Tuesday. When we get the packet out on Thursday, are we going to make it known that this will be tabled so that 50 people don't show up and then can't speak?
It will be.
Known.
I'm going to work with Mark on how, and with Wendy obviously, on how that gets phrased on there, but I think, large print red that says, council intends to make a motion to table this until this date, in which case there will be no public hearing there, and so we will do that at can we do that, Steve, can we do that at the agenda change instead of waiting until we get into?
Yes, you can do that at agenda change, and certainly know that the public hearing, that there's going to be a motion to continue the public hearing to January 15th.
Okay, so we'll do that at the very beginning of the meeting when we approve the agenda.
And in the packet, written in the document when it goes out on Thursday.
Yes.
And online.
And online and social media.
Yeah, we'll make contact with people.
Yeah, and then anyone you talk to,
emails.
any emails you get,
Yeah.
I think manage that back to folks so that they have that expectation. The other thing that we are going to do, any more on that? Everybody okay?
So are we going to say why we're tabling it? As in, to give everybody more chance to think about it, or to have fights outside, or?
Just table it, move it to a study session on the 8th to discuss it.
Well, I know, but I mean, if you do something like this, people can start thinking you've got some kind of hidden agenda and you're trying to pull strings behind the scenes and all that. There's a good reason to be postponing this as in to give people more chance to study the issues, right? To think about the issues.
We'll make a short statement about why. And council's intent is simply wanting more time to talk at a study session themselves about some of the alternatives.
Yeah.
So we'll work on that.
The fact is, we have 20 other items on the agenda.
Yeah, it's not giving it its time.
Along the lines both of what Peggy and you said, because we've already had the first reading.
You've had the
So if
first
we're going to
reading.
have a bunch of amendments coming in, that's not fair either to the public because they don't know what these amendments are. And we're going to come in and like almost rewrite this thing perhaps. I mean, it's not like a simple amendment where we would come in and make simple amendments. I got a feeling these could be pretty big. So are we actually going to be changing this second reading?
Well, I think you'll be, when we have second reading, you'll be introducing, I'm expecting, the ordinance based on what you discussed at the January 8th study session. So it could be a somewhat different ordinance than the first read, and that's fine, because the system envisions that you reintroduce the ordinance for second reading, and that's when you have the public hearing. So
Even though it's a different...
you don't have to go back to first read because it's a second introduction.
And we can make it clear the differences between first read and whatever the council may consider for the second reading. So public will see clearly what that is.
More than what you would normally see in attached documents for this item, because my expectation would be based on what your direction is on the 8th. There will be the actual introduction for second read, but there will also be a red line strikeout version showing the changes from the first read.
Good. I think that's really important for folks to see what has changed.
We will certainly do that. And then if you want to meet with me, because I know we have the holidays and everything coming up in the press of business, just call Becky if we need to do it on. Unfortunately, my next 2 nights are tied up with meetings, but if we need to make it a Friday night or a Saturday coffee or whatever, by all means, don't hesitate to call. I'll adjust my schedule, and I'm always up for some coffee, and we can do that and talk about any of the issues.
So the other thing that we're going to be doing is there is another public hearing on the agenda. That was the rezone, and that was the rezone at, is that Centennial Square?
Bellevue Connection.
Bellevue Connection.
They're calling it Bellevue Connection.
Centennial Square.
Huh?
Yeah, Centennial Square.
We used to call it Centennial Square.
Oh, I see.
And so they have asked for that to be postponed until the 15th, I think.
That's correct.
So because that's quasi judicial, what we will do is we will not hear from the applicant, we will not have a staff presentation, we will open the public hearing. If there are people there who come down and specifically who are unable to change their plans and come down for the public hearing, we will, a month later, we will hear that. It will go on the record for that rezone. And then we will close that public hearing. We will not debate, we will not discuss, we will not do any of that, but we will have their comments for the record. And then we will, on the 15th, those will be included in our packet as comments for the record, and then we'll have to go through the applicant.
And this is the one over by King Soopers we're talking about.
Yeah. So that's a little different than what we've done before, but because it's quasi judicial, we need to go ahead and do that. I think once people realize that there's gonna be another, then we may not have anyone, but if we do, we'll be able to take care of them.
Do we have to open the public comment again? So we have 2 public comments, or can we just open the public comment and postpone it until?
Yes, you open the public hearing and simply indicate, the mayor as presiding officer can indicate that this will be set for a public hearing on January 15th. However, if there's anyone who is present tonight who could not make that day, their testimony will be taken and included in the record for council to consider. They'll be recognized, the testimony will be taken. The mayor will then announce that the public hearing is going to be recessed and entertain a motion to carry this over to January 15th.
So someone who speaks at the first one can speak at the second one?
No. I mean, the idea here is that because this is quasi-judicial, if, and we've had this happen once before on an item where we carried it over and we had a couple people who couldn't make it, they are able to get their testimony in.
Right, I understand that,
But
but
no,
they're not gonna be talking
They're not going
twice.
to, no, they get one opportunity.
Because that's, we don't let them do that in a regular public.
Right, yeah, I just wanna make that clear.
You get one opportunity to testify.
Correct, and then so if there are people that testify, then if they do sign up at the other one, then we'll let them know.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure everybody's aware.
We would be tabling, we would be having the public discussion one, and then tabling that.
To January
Which has
15th.
Close the public discussion, the public testimony, then reopening and allowing new people to speak. Now,
Good job.
Follow the boundary ball. Yeah.
So I'm expecting, if we do this, after the first one, there'll be people maybe who spoke, who then email us with additional comments. Will we accept those for the public record?
Those you should forward those to the clerk, so that those are all included as part. If you receive any email, because this is a quasi judicial item, please forward those to the clerk so that they can become part of the official record of the case.
So the reason I'm saying that is, in a sense, those people have two opportunities, just as the people who email us before the public hearing.
Just like that, they have.
Would have.
Yeah, nobody's losing any,
Yeah.
everybody's getting exact, we're just splitting it.
Camera time, they're not getting the camera time.
And so just please do email any comments you receive to the city clerk so she can incorporate those into the public record.
Okay, so I think that is,
By the way, on that one, if it has like everybody else's name on there, I don't go forwarding stuff. I mean, that'd be like all 7 of us, so we got the same email, it's all 7 of us forwarding.
Yes.
No, I don't do that.
No, and as long as somebody, forward, so we just have it as part of
I nominate Pat.
Yeah.
There you go.
Actually, Peggy usually does it.
no, we know Peggy does it, so we just like Peggy do it. The other thing that I am going to do on Tuesday night, given the size of Tuesday night's agenda, is I'm going to limit public comment in the beginning of the meeting to 30 minutes. And anybody that doesn't fit in to that 30 minutes, then they will go to the end of the meeting. So they will still be able to do their public comment. But we have over a dozen public hearings we've got to get through. And so we're going to have people, applicants sitting, other people sitting in there, and lawyers on clocks and all of that. And so I think, I don't know that we'll have that much public comment, but if we do, and that will also be noted on the agenda, that we'll take the first 30 minutes and then move them to the back. So they'll have their opportunity to talk. We're just going to split that.
Because there's nothing on the agenda that night that they would be talking about. But yeah, that'd be all right.
Yeah, we do
Doesn't
have.
stop people though, Jerry.
I know, but
Yeah.
that'd be okay, theoretically, yeah.
Yeah.
people.
Right.
Yeah.
And other topics, yeah.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
And there may not be, but just in the event,
Right.
we never know what's.
So they're not missing out on anything that was.
Okay, so Mark?
I just got a couple of quick things here. We do have a first reading next week, the subdivision code changes, and we had this discussion with council this past summer here.
Just like I'm sorry, did I say that out loud?
So, I don't want to get into the detail, but, there was kind of a simple process for minor and administrative plats, kind of a subdivision provisions that were in the building code. We want to take it out of that, move it someplace else. And condominium plats, we want to do those currently. We tell people to go over to Arapahoe County. So if you remember that conversation, great. Steve certainly could talk tonight if you want to hear more detail about that.
No, I remember.
I would just say this is a really critical ordinance. This is going to significantly improve how we process subdivisions. So, which is why it's coming to you.
Yeah.
Well, I know that this one got a lot of conversation and discussion at the planning board meeting. Do we need to take this to a study session before it goes on the agenda? Because it's been, 6 months since we looked at this, and I haven't watched the video, I just don't know.
Well, I'm hoping not. And, I don't know about the planning commission comment on this, but, we can certainly look at that. But this is, quite honestly, this is a result of us taking other kind of code issues like short-term rentals, quite honestly, and that's why some of these issues have been kind of delayed in time. So that's why it's been a while since we've talked about in a study session this issue, and now you're finally kind of seeing it come to a first reading.
Nothing should have changed from what we saw unless, as Karina said, planning.
The planning commission was very favorable. All members, with one exception, were totally in support. And the member with the exception, her concern was that the commission had spent a great deal of time crafting all the restrictions on administrative plats. And she was, I would say, surprised that staff was recommending the deletion of those restrictions. And we will have a chart for you when we get to second read where we can show that with those restrictions. We've literally only done 2 administrative plats, and we've had a whole number of administrative plats that we couldn't do because of those restrictions. And that was her concern. The rest of the commission was totally in support of the changes, including the removal of the restrictions on administrative plans.
And this is on first read for us, right?
Correct.
So I would say if you've got, pay some special attention to this in your packet, and then if you've got some questions and stuff during the 2 weeks in between, we'll process and get those.
And the packet will reference our previous meetings.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, correct. Just quickly, 2 other things. Again, you're going to see an ordinance here on first read here next week on the Bradley House. And this has to do when the city actually had the housing authority within the city, and we actually spun them off as a separate standing organization. At that point in time, we actually transferred legally the assets to them, real property. Well, apparently on the Bradley House, we transferred the building, but not the underlying property. And so they just discovered this, Schmo did here, and the intent, based on the records that we can see, was no reason why the city would ever want to retain just the property and not the building. So they made a request, Schmo, for us to kind of complete the transaction. So that's what that issue's about.
Because
it's off of Datura, just over there on the east side, just down a couple of
Is
blocks.
that just a
Littleton
bar with
United
last name or something?
Methodist
Or is
is
that
right
a
on the other side of the
affordable
parking
housing
lot.
unit?
just
Yes,
west
that's one of their
parking lot.
units.
And isn't it, I think South Metro Housing is looking at doing
Opportunity to make some money. Sell it.
for some sort of property evaluation or something like that. They need to get this done, and that's when they stumbled across that it hadn't been done. So they kind of have a time sensitivity to.
Very much so. In fact, they have a federal program they're trying
That's
to take
what it is.
advantage of here with HUD. And they got an extension to get them through January, but the fact that they don't own the underlying property is a problem. And so we got a request for us.
So
to
it looks
complete the
it
transaction.
looks scarier on the agenda than it really is. So there's a little bit of background.
The last thing there is a really odd nuance here, but you'll see there a resolution here, I believe, for the council to allow us to move basically Sam LaFox's cost in HR, where she originally was, over to the city manager's office. By charter, the city council has to move funds from one department to another. Very interesting nuance that I've only ever seen for Littleton as a city, but you'll see that on there specifically about Sam LaFox.
It's really funds between departments.
Charter requirement.
Yeah.
We truly are a unicorn.
On that issue, we are.
Several issues.
Yeah, that's my just quick updates on a couple of things.
Steve, anything?
One other thing, the city clerk has received all 3 canvases from all 3 jurisdictions, and I'll be working with her to get you out the final numbers consolidated from all 3 counties and the most recent election.
Anything change?
The percentages have slightly gone up. We have the breakdowns county by county, and it's just that the canvases take 17 days after the election, and the canvases are the official final numbers.
17 days after the election.
Yes.
Been a little longer than that.
We're a little more than that.
Well, yes.
Sort of turn it like Florida.
The clerk recorders, that's what the statute says, but they get them done when they get
71,
them done.
I think, is 71, not 17.
Yeah.
And there was a holiday in there too, so that counts.
Okay, anything else?
Cool.
Good.
Okay.
All right, thank you. We're adjourned.